There is a misconception that people who push love away are afraid of commitment. I don't believe that's true. I think most people who run from love are actually terrified of what love awakens inside of them. Because the moment someone truly matters to you, something else appears alongside that love. Risk, the risk of loss, the risk of disappointment, the risk of betrayal, the risk of abandonment, the risk of needing someone. If your inner operating system learned very early in life that needing people was unsafe, then every deeper level of intimacy can feel threatening. You may desperately want connection. You may genuinely love the person standing in front of you. And you can even imagine a future with them. Yet, the closer they get, the stronger the urge becomes to pull away. Not because you don't care, because you care too much. And that is the paradox most people never really understand. The people who appear the most independent are often carrying the deepest fear of being hurt. They have simply become very good at convincing themselves that they don't need anyone. But underneath the self sufficiency, beneath the independence, beneath the emotional distance, there is often a longing to be loved deeply and completely. And the question is not whether they want love. The question is that love feels dangerous. And once you understand that, everything changes. Because the people who seem to run from intimacy are not broken. They're not incapable of commitment. They are certainly not destined to be alone. What they are carrying is a survival program, a program that may have been running for decades. And until that program is seen and healed, it quietly shapes every relationship you enter. Now, today, I want to show you what is actually happening beneath the surface, why some people keep pulling away from love, and why there is one type of partner they eventually stop running from. But to understand that, we have to begin much earlier, long before the relationships, long before the heartbreak, long before they learned how to protect themselves. We have to begin with the child because every adult relationship eventually reveals the places within us that never fully healed. A child enters the world naturally connected, naturally trusting, naturally open. A child doesn't question whether they deserve love. A child simply reaches for it. But what happens when that reaching isn't met? What happens when the child is repeatedly shown that their emotions are inconvenient? What happens when vulnerability is ignored, dismissed, criticized, punished, or simply not understood? Maybe nobody intended any harm. Maybe the parents were just carrying their own wounds. Maybe they were overwhelmed, stressed, emotionally unavailable, or just simply doing the best they could with what they knew. Maybe they needed to send the child away for some reason. But the child does not interpret events intellectually. The child interprets energetically. And the message that often gets recorded deep within the inner operating system of the child is this: you are not loved or needed. So the inner operating system learns it's safer not to need, it's safer not to ask, it's safer to handle everything myself. And so a survival strategy is born. The child becomes highly independent, strong, capable, self reliant. They learn how to carry their pain alone. From the outside, this often looks admirable. People praise them. People call them mature, strong, resilient, and they are. But every survival strategy has a cost because the same walls that protected them from disappointment are now blocks to intimacy. The same armor that protected them from pain eventually prevents them from receiving love. The child grows up, the body ages, the circumstances change, but the operating system remains the same. And now those programs begin showing up in relationships. At first, everything feels wonderful. There is excitement, possibility, freedom. Nothing feels threatening because nothing has become deeply important yet. And then something shifts. The relationship starts becoming real. The other person matters. The connection deepens. Expectations emerge. Vulnerability increases. And suddenly, the old program activates. Not consciously, but automatically. And the mind may say, I love this person. But the nervous system is saying something entirely different. Danger. This is where many partners become confused with the connection because they assume that if someone pulls away, they must not care. And this is not always true. Sometimes people pull away precisely because they do care. They care a lot. The deeper the connection becomes, the more vulnerable they feel. The vulnerability activates old survival patterns. And this is why people can genuinely love someone and simultaneously feel the urge to create distance. The distance isn't always about the other person. It's not about you. The distance is often an attempt to regulate fear because they have the fear of being hurt, fear of losing themselves, fear of depending on someone, fear of repeating old pain. And the tragedy is that most people don't even realize that this is happening. They simply experience a growing discomfort around closeness. So they withdraw. Their partner senses the withdrawal and naturally seeks more reassurance. The more reassurance they seek, the more pressure the other person feels. The more pressure they feel, the further they retreat. And soon both people are triggering each other's wounds. One fears abandonment, the other fears engulfment. One moves closer, the other moves away. Neither is trying to hurt the other. Both are simply acting from unconscious programs. And eventually, the relationship collapses. Not because love wasn't present, but because the wounds were stronger than the love. At least for that moment. And now, here is the part I really want you to hear. The person who finally creates lasting commitment is rarely the person who loves the hardest. It is rarely the person who sacrificed the most. It is rarely the person who waits forever hoping to be chosen. The person who changes everything is someone whose love does not feel like a trap. Think about it. For someone whose operating system associates closeness with danger, pressure immediately creates resistance. Even loving pressure, even well intentioned pressure. The moment love begins to feel like an obligation, a demand, or a responsibility they cannot escape from, their system starts preparing for survival. And then occasionally they will meet somebody different. Someone whose energy feels totally different. Someone who is capable of deep love without losing themselves. Someone who is emotionally available but not emotionally dependent. Someone who genuinely enjoys the connection but does not require the other person to complete them. This person possesses something incredibly powerful: inner wholeness. Their happiness does not depend entirely on this relationship. They have purpose, they have friends, interests, passion, a relationship with themselves. So when challenges arise, they communicate honestly. They do not collapse, they do not panic. They do not make the relationship responsible for regulating their own emotional state. And something remarkable then happens. For the first time, intimacy begins to feel safe. Not because the avoidant person suddenly changes overnight, but because their nervous system is having a completely new experience. The relationship no longer feels like a loss of freedom. It feels like a choice. And that distinction is everything. Because love was never meant to be imprisonment. Love was always meant to be a choice. One whole person choosing another whole person again and again, day after day, moment after moment. The partner who creates the safety usually does three things differently. First, they tell the truth. They express their feelings clearly. If something hurts them, they say so. If they desire more connection, they say so. If they need something, they communicate it. But they do not use guilt, manipulation, emotional pressure, or endless repetition. They trust themselves enough to speak honestly and then allow space. This feels profoundly safe. Second, they do not abandon themselves. This is where many people get it wrong. They become smaller to keep the relationship. They stop expressing needs. They stop sharing concerns. They stop taking up space. They convince themselves that they are being understanding. But in reality, they are disappearing. And the relationship cannot thrive when one person disappears. The healthiest partners remain fully themselves. They bring their truth, their desires, their boundaries, their needs, their individuality, not aggression, not defensiveness, simply honesty. And that authenticity creates respect. The third quality is perhaps the most important. They are willing to walk away if the relationship stops growing, not as a threat, not as a strategy, not as manipulation, but because they understand their own value. They know that love requires participation from both people. And while they are willing to offer patience, they are not willing to abandon themselves indefinitely. Ironically, this creates more safety than endless accommodation because now the relationship is based on truth. Both people are choosing freely. Neither person is being held hostage by fear. Now, I want to speak directly to those of you who recognize yourself in these patterns. Maybe you've spent years wondering why intimacy feels harder for you than it seems to for other people. Maybe you've watched yourself pull away from relationships that mattered. Maybe you've convinced yourself that you're simply not built for partnership. I want you to hear this. The version of you that learned to protect yourself was not wrong. The version of you was intelligent, resourceful, adaptive. It helped you survive. It carried you through experiences that felt overwhelming at the time. There is no shame in that. But survival is not the same thing as living and thriving. At some point, the strategies that once protected you begin limiting you. Not because you're bad, but because you are outdated. You are no longer the child who created them. You are no longer living in those circumstances. You are no longer powerless. And healing begins when you gently allow yourself to update the evidence, not through force, not through self judgment, not through trying to become someone else, but through small moments of courage, one honest conversation, one vulnerable truth, one moment of staying present instead of withdrawing, one experience of letting someone see the real you. This is how transformation happens. Not through breakthroughs, but through accumulation, small experiences repeated consistently, moments where you discover that closeness does not always lead to pain, moments where vulnerability does not lead to rejection, moments where connection feels nourishing rather than threatening. Over time, the operating system begins to update. The nervous system begins to relax. The heart begins to open. And eventually, something extraordinary happens. You stop seeing love as danger. You stop seeing connection as risk. You stop seeing vulnerability as weakness. And one day you find yourself reaching for someone. Not because you're lonely, not because you're afraid, not because you need saving, but because you genuinely want to share your life with them. That moment is sacred because it marks the end of survival and the beginning of conscious relationships. In my experience, this is what lifelong love is actually built upon. Not chemistry, not compatibility, not perfect communication, not finding your soulmate. It is built upon two people who are willing to heal, two people willing to bring awareness to their unconscious patterns, two people willing to choose growth over protection. The partner who changes everything is not the one who rescues you. They are the one who creates enough safety for you to rescue yourself. And eventually, they become something you may have been searching for your entire life. Not a savior, not a solution, not an escape, a home, a kind of home that exists within a relationship where neither person has to hide, where neither person has to perform, where neither person has to abandon themselves to be loved. And that is what people who spend years running from intimacy are truly searching for. Not distance, not freedom, not isolation, but safety. The safety to finally put down the armor, the safety to stop surviving, the safety to be fully seen and discover that love remains. And when that happens, the running stops. Not because someone chased them hard enough, but because for the first time, love feels safer than hiding.